Your mama drive a tank too. Officer Derek Boyle's laugh was the kind that carries thick and easy, the laugh of a man who has always assumed the room is his. He stood on the sidewalk of Morrow Street in the amber light of an October afternoon, his cruiser's lights still cycling in orange and blue behind him, and he looked at the girl in front of him with the comfortable expression of someone who is not in a hurry and does not plan to be. Zara Coleman didn't blink. She looked at him with the particular stillness of someone who has learned that stillness is its own kind of answer, and then she said very quietly, "Keep laughing." "Oh, I will." He glanced back at his partner's cruiser, pulling up to the curb. Officer Craig Lewis, younger, thinner, still in the habit of arriving and looking to Boyle for orientation, and the look between them was brief and practiced. "Special Forces," Boyle repeated, tasting the words a second time the way he'd tasted them the first, like a punchline only he got. "Right, okay. I'm not going to keep explaining myself to you," Zara said. "I didn't ask you to explain anything." He dropped back to the measured voice, lower, more patient, the register he used with teenagers he'd decided needed managing. "I'm just asking some routine questions about your situation here." "You've been asking me questions for 22 minutes, Zara said. She knew the exact time because she'd started her phone's stopwatch at minute 3. "About a car that belongs to my cousin, who showed you his ID and registration, and whose plates came back clean. You're still here because you want to be." Boyle studied her. The calculation behind his eyes was legible if you knew what to look for. She did, because she had watched this same calculation on video 9 separate times over the past 47 days, and had come to know every stage of it the way you know a piece of music. After enough repetitions, the slight shift of weight from right foot to left, the fractional hardening at the jaw, the small decision being made in real time about what the person in front of him could be made to do. She'd learned to read all of it from 40 feet away with her phone in her pocket. "Your cousin left," he observed. "Because there was no reason for him to stay," Zara said. "Same reason I should be able to leave." "In a minute. For what reason?" The patient voice got quieter. It always got quieter right before the temperature changed. "For the reason that I'm not done yet." "What charge?" Zara said. "If you're detaining me, what charge?" "I'm a minor standing on a public sidewalk. I've answered your questions. The car is gone. If you're holding me without cause, I'd like that explained right now. And if you're not holding me, I'd like to go home." Something shifted in Boyle's expression. Not anger exactly. Something closer to recalculation. He turned briefly to Lewis with a look that said, "Can you believe this?" Lewis looked at the pavement. "Where did you learn that?" Boyle said. "School," Zara said, which was not untrue. Boyle moved his weight. He tried a different register, warmer, almost collegial, the voice he sometimes used when the younger officers had family problems he needed them to overlook during a shift. "Look," he said. "I'm not trying to make your day harder. You seem like a smart young woman. I respect that. I need you to understand that when I see something that doesn't look right, it's my job to make sure everything's okay. That's it. I'm not the bad guy here." Zara waited for him to finish. "No charge," she said. "No reasonable articulable suspicion documented. The owner of the vehicle has been released. I am not connected to any reported incident on this block today. If you're releasing me, I'd like that confirmed. If you're not, I'd like to know on what grounds." The warmth left his voice completely. "You practice that somewhere?" "I practice most things," Zara said. On the sidewalk, a small crowd had formed the way crowds form on residential blocks when something is happening, and nobody is quite sure whether it is the kind of something you should be watching or the kind you should be walking away from. Earl Davies, 61 years old, 34 years on Morrow Street, stood near the bus stop with his phone raised and his angle deliberate, the practiced stillness of a man who has done this before and knows that doing it right means not drawing attention to the doing. A woman with a stroller had slowed, stopped, looked at the scene with an expression that went through several things quickly, and then turned the stroller around and walked away without looking back. The exit of a person who cannot stay and say nothing and cannot stay and say something, and has chosen not to make that decision in front of a cop. Earl kept filming. Boyle tried once more, this time with Lewis at his side. Lewis had drifted over with the specific reluctance of a man being pulled by gravity he doesn't like. Together, Boyle and Lewis occupied more of the sidewalk, and Boyle said, with the pleasant reasonableness of someone who is fairly certain the math has just shifted in his favor, "We're going to need a parent or guardian contacted. You're a minor, you've been uncooperative with a police inquiry, and we need an adult on record before we can wrap this up." "I'm not under arrest," Zara said. "You don't need an adult for a voluntary conversation, and that's all this has been. A voluntary conversation that I can stop at any time." "She's right," Lewis said. Both of them looked at him. Lewis looked at the pavement, his jaw set, the expression of a man who has surprised himself and is not entirely comfortable with it, but is not taking it back either. "That's the law, Derek. She's right." Boyle said nothing for 4 full seconds. Something moved behind his eyes. Not anger at Lewis exactly, but the specific chill of a man who has just understood that the alliance he assumed was solid is not what he thought. He turned back to Zara. He tried once more, dropping the pleasant register entirely, moving into something quieter and more personal. Not threatening, just very small, very direct. "Let me ask you something honest," he said. "You ever think that all this, the phone, the logging, the little speech about your rights, you ever think it makes things harder for everybody, for the people on this street? Because when you come out here and you make every encounter into a confrontation, you make my job harder. And when my job's harder, everybody on this block feels it." He let that sit for a beat. "That's just the truth." Zara looked at him for a long moment. "Mrs. Simmons is 72 years old," she said. "She waters her roses in the evening because that's when it cools down enough to work in the yard. She's been doing it on the same block for 30 years. If that's a confrontation, I think you might want to reconsider which of us is causing it." Earl Davies, near the bus stop, made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, but had something like satisfaction in it. Boyle's jaw moved. He looked at Earl. Earl looked back with the patient, untroubled expression of a man who has been on this street for 34 years and has seen a great many things attempt to intimidate him and has not so far found one that worked. "You know what your problem is?" Boyle said, turning back to Zara. "I'm sure you're about to tell me." "Your problem," he said, "is that you think this is a game." "No." Zara held his gaze without flinching. "I think this is Morrow Street at 4:15 on a Tuesday. And I think you stopped me because you felt like it. And I think you've been keeping me here because you don't like that I'm not scared of you. My problem isn't that I think this is a game. My problem is that I know it's not." Boyle's jaw moved once. The crowd had grown to 11 people. Across the street, a car pulled up to the curb and went still. Zara didn't look at it. She kept her eyes on Boyle. Cruiser lights kept cycling, orange and blue, across the faces of everyone watching. Zara Coleman was 16 years old and had been filing reports since she was 12. She'd started small, a 600 apiece, on why the only grocery store within walking distance of her neighborhood had closed, who owned the property now, and what the community had been promised in the rezoning application versus what had actually been delivered. Published it on a blog with 11 readers, one of whom was her great-aunt Patricia Ross, and another of whom was herself. She hadn't cared about the audience. She had cared about getting the facts right. Now she was the junior editor of the Eastview High Observer. She maintained a 4.1 grade point average, and she had been quietly, methodically documenting Officer Derek Boyle for exactly 47 days. The project had started because of Mrs. Simmons, who was 72 years old and lived 3 houses down, and had been stopped 3 times in 1 month for what the official incident reports described as suspicious behavior, which turned out to mean watering her roses in the evening, walking her small terrier around the block, and sitting on her own front steps after dinner with a glass of sweet tea. Mrs. Simmons had called Miss Patricia to report all of it. Miss Patricia had passed it along at the dinner table, in the quiet, exhausted tone of a woman who has been carrying too much for too long and no longer has a particular place to put more of it. Zara had gotten a look on her face. Miss Patricia said, before Zara could open her mouth, "Zara John, whatever you are thinking, you need to finish your food first." "I'm not thinking anything," Zara said, which was not the truth. She went out the next morning with her phone in her hoodie pocket, the lens barely visible through the fabric, and started watching. She was methodical. She changed locations and angles. She never filmed the same corner twice in a row. She learned the street's patterns, who was usually where and when, which parked cars stayed long enough to stand near without drawing attention, which sightlines gave good audio without requiring her to be close. She did it the way she did most things, with the quiet, systematic patience of someone who had been taught, even at a distance and through short phone calls and careful silences. That patience was not passive. Patience was a decision you made over and over until the thing you were waiting for came into focus. The fourth morning, she filmed Boyle's stop of the McKenna family's son, Marcus, who was 14 years old and had been walking home from school with his backpack and a library book about aircraft. The stop lasted 28 minutes. At no point did Marcus raise his voice. He stood on the sidewalk and answered questions in the careful, worried voice of a kid who has been taught to be very careful and is trying very hard to do the right thing. And that care and that trying were not enough to make Boyle move along any faster. Zara watched from behind a parked minivan 40 feet away, phone in her pocket, and when she got home she sat in her room for a while before she opened her laptop. She'd needed 20 minutes to get past the anger enough to write the log entry accurately. But she'd written it accurately. That was the rule she'd given herself from the beginning. Accurate. Whatever she felt about it had to stay out of the documentation. Because the documentation was the point. The documentation was what lasted. The documentation was what you could do something with. The fourth morning she filmed Boyle's stop of the McKenna family's son, Marcus, who was 14 years old, and had been walking home from school with his backpack and a library book about aircraft. The stop lasted 28 minutes. At no point did Marcus raise his voice. He stood on the sidewalk and answered questions in the careful, worried voice of a kid who has been taught to be very careful and is trying very hard to do the right thing. And that care and that trying were not enough to make Boyle move along any faster. Zara watched from behind a parked minivan 40 feet away, phone in her pocket, and when she got home she sat in her room for a while before she opened her laptop. She'd needed 20 minutes to get past the anger enough to write the log entry accurately. But she'd written it accurately. That was the rule she'd given herself from the beginning. Accurate. Whatever she felt about it had to stay out of the documentation. Because the documentation was the point. The documentation was what lasted. The documentation was what you could do something with. Feelings were real, and she had plenty of them, but feelings alone didn't build a case, and she wanted to build a case. She sent the raw files to the anonymous community tip line she'd found in a legal aid newsletter, a line specifically maintained for documenting police misconduct in the field. She kept copies. She logged each submission in a notes file with the timestamp, a brief description, and the case confirmation number the tip line's automated system sent back. She had 11 of those numbers saved, in a row with their dates. She didn't tell her great-aunt. She didn't tell her mother, who was 8 months into a deployment and called when she could, which was never as often as Zara wanted, and who spoke in short, careful sentences when she did, packing herself into a shape small enough to fit through a phone line without taking up too much of a life. She wasn't actually inside. Zara was angry about the not being inside in a way she had learned not to say directly, because saying it directly had never changed anything, so she put the anger into work. Some people drink. Some people run. Zara Coleman documented things, and if the documentation was also a form of standing in her neighborhood with a camera and refusing to disappear, well, she knew where that quality came from. She'd read it in a shelf of field notebooks she'd found at 12 and consumed in 2 days flat. Her cousin Deshawn's car was a 2019 Ford Fusion in silver, registered, insured, and nothing about it was suspicious. Unless your criterion for suspicious was a black teenager standing near a car on a Tuesday afternoon in October. Deshawn had gone into Lenny's Quick Stop for a sports drink and had been inside for approximately 4 minutes when Boyle pulled up. He'd seen Zara on the sidewalk and decided that was worth investigating. The mistake she'd made, if you could call it that, was not looking afraid. She knew Boyle's first 5 minutes by heart from her documentation work, the reasonable approach, the patient inquiry, the small, imperceptible shift in temperature when the expected response didn't come. She'd watched it on video 9 times and understood every step the way you understand a mechanism when you've seen it run enough times. In person, It came with a weight that video didn't fully carry. The social physics of being a teenager in front of an adult with a badge and an unspecified willingness to complicate your afternoon. She'd stood her ground through it. She'd answered the questions and told him whose car it was. And Deshawn had come out and presented his documents. And Boyle had run the plates. And everything had come back clean. Boyle had not left, that was the tell. She knew it from the footage. The cop who is done with a stop lets it go when the plates come back clean. Boyle had stayed. She'd made the further move of telling Deshawn to take the car. She lowered her voice and turned a quarter turn away from Boyle, using the specific register their grandmother had given them both before she died. The one that means I know what I'm doing, trust me, don't add to it. Deshawn looked at Boyle, then at Zara. He was 23 and had made this particular calculation before, and he understood what she was telling him. You sure? Go, she said. He went, and after the car was gone, Boyle had Zara alone on the sidewalk of Morrow Street, and the stop became what it had always been going to be. Lewis had been standing back for 7 minutes by then, one hand on his belt, projecting the studied neutrality of someone who had decided that not visibly participating was the same as not participating. He was 28 years old, 2 years on the force, and he had the specific look of a man perpetually computing the cost of speaking up versus the cost of not speaking up, and arriving each time at the answer that cost the least in the short run. He surveyed the crowd. He surveyed the scene. Craig, Boyle said without looking at him, see if you can run the plate on that rental parked across the street. Lewis looked at the car across the street. He held his eyes on it, 1 beat longer than the request required. The expression of someone hearing a piece of music he knows from somewhere else and cannot immediately name but knows with certainty that he knows. He didn't move. Craig, Boyle said again, a different texture in it. In a second, Lewis said in a voice that was not his usual voice. The door of the rental across the street opened. Maya Coleman was 36 years old and had been back in Fayetteville for 4 hours and 14 minutes. She'd landed in Raleigh at noon, processed out, grabbed her bag, and driven south on I-95 with all 4 windows down, because 8 months of controlled environments had made open air feel like something you needed to earn back slowly. She'd called Miss Patricia from the highway, voicemail. She'd called Zara's cell, voicemail, probably still in school. She was going to surprise her. She'd planned to stop at Patricia's house first, clean up, let herself recalibrate, try to remember how to be a regular person before she tried to be a mother again. She turned onto Morrow Street and saw the cruiser lights. She parked in 12 seconds. She sat behind the wheel for 30 more, watching. She watched Boyle's hands and his weight distribution. Hands loose, weight settled. The body language of a man who is not expecting physical resistance and is not in any hurry because he does not believe the situation can get away from him. She watched Lewis standing half a step back, the posture of someone not committing to a position, the specific angle of a man who has already decided he is not going to insert himself. She watched Earl Davies near the bus stop with his phone, the practiced angle he was using, not a bystander, a documentarian, and recognized the care in the way he held it. She noted the absence of the woman with the stroller, the fresh gap in the crowd where she'd been, and understood what that meant about the temperature of the situation. She noted Lewis's unwillingness to move when Boyle spoke to him. That told her something. She noted the way Boyle's back had changed in the last few seconds, less patient now, slightly more rigid. She noted the specific way Zara was standing, weight forward just slightly, not combative, but not yielding either. The posture of someone who has decided not to give ground and has been holding that decision long enough that it has become physical. She catalogued all of it the way she would catalogue any environment she stepped into, because the 30 seconds before you move are worth more than the first 3 minutes after you do. Then she got out. She crossed Morrow Street without hurrying. Dark jeans, worn leather boots, a green jacket she'd had for 4 years and washed enough times to lose most of its shape. No jewelry. Her natural hair close-cropped and plain. 5'7". The only remarkable thing about her, to someone who didn't know what they were looking at, was how she moved. Not urgency, not performance, just the economy of someone who has learned to treat every step as a resource and does not spend them carelessly. No accommodation to the presence of other people, not rude, just precise. She reached the edge of the crowd and stopped. She looked at Boyle, then she looked at her daughter. Zara, still facing Boyle, hadn't moved, but something in the way she was holding herself had shifted. A tightening at her jaw and shoulders, and then an effortful release, the specific pattern of someone who has been carrying a weight alone for a long time and has just felt another hand come to help hold it, and is trying not to show how much that matters. She kept her eyes on Boyle. Maya looked back at Boyle. "Is there a problem here, officer?" Her voice was entirely even, in the way of something that doesn't need to move because it already knows where it stands. Boyle turned. He made his assessment fast. "Woman, probably the mother, probably here to escalate. Handle it the standard way." "Ma'am, your daughter and I are just having a conversation." "About what?" Maya said. "Ma'am, about what?" Same tone, same inflection, not a single degree of difference. Boyle took a breath through his nose. "Your daughter was in close proximity to a vehicle that—" "The vehicle," Maya said, "is registered to her cousin Deshawn Coleman, age 23. Current registered address on Kelsey Drive. The plate is clean. The registration is current. The owner presented documents and was released approximately 16 minutes ago, after which there was no vehicle for anyone to be suspicious near." She did not look toward the store. She held Boyle's eyes. What else? Lewis wasn't looking at Boyle. He was looking at Maya with the expression of a man who has placed the piece of music, who knows not just the melody, but where he first heard it and why it matters. Boyle held out his hand for ID, without quite making it a request. Maya reached into her jacket and produced her military ID and held it at arm's length without stepping toward him, making him come to it. He took it, he read it. "Master Sergeant Maya A. Coleman, United States Army, Special Forces Command." The card carried the seal and the format and the specific weight of something that does not bluff. He held it 2 beats longer than necessary. Not long enough to be an incident, exactly long enough to be what it was then. "Master Sergeant, Fort Liberty," Maya said. "Cultural support team, 8 months deployed. I landed in Raleigh at 12:05 this afternoon." She watched him hold her card. "I've been on this sidewalk 5 minutes watching you hold my daughter without a charge. What law has she broken?" Lewis said quietly. "Derek, not agreement, not support." The sound of a man placing a marker in the record so he could find it later and say, "I was here, I saw this, I said the name when it needed saying." Boyle handed back the ID. "Master Sergeant, with respect, your daughter was displaying behavioral indicators that—" "Name them," Maya said, specifically. He said nothing. "She was uncooperative," he said. "In what way?" Silence. "She was standing on a public sidewalk," Maya said, her voice carrying the same level precision it had held from her first sentence. "She answered your questions. The car's owner showed documents and was released. She has not been charged with anything. You've had her here for 28 minutes. She let a beat pass. For what purpose, officer?" Boyle's jaw tightened. He glanced at the crowd. 14 people now, maybe more, and the glance was telling. The look of a man who has realized the room is bigger than he wanted it to be for this conversation. He turned back to Maya. "There are aspects of this stop," he said, careful now, each word chosen, "that you're not fully privy to. I'd ask for a little professional courtesy here, ma'am." "Professional courtesy," Maya said without blinking. "You want courtesy from me." The word hung in the air exactly as long as she intended. "I want my daughter released," Maya said. "Right now. And then I would like a written explanation of the grounds for this stop filed with the department within 24 hours. She held his eyes. "And your body cam has been off since before you got out of your vehicle." The last sentence landed differently than anything that had come before it. Lewis looked at Boyle's chest cam. The indicator light was off. He looked at his own cam, blinking green, steady as it had been since he arrived. Lewis took one quiet step sideways and did not step back. Sergeant Vivian Hargrove pulled up to the scene at 4:38. She didn't use her siren. She parked at an angle that gave her a clean view of all parties and stepped out without hurrying, with the deliberateness of a person who has rehearsed an arrival in her mind and knows exactly what she's walking into. Zara watched her come and read the arrival the way she read most things, as a statement about how someone wanted to be seen. Uniform, mid-30s, a compact woman who moved through the edge of the crowd with the authority of someone who has already made her decisions, not rushing, not pausing. moving at the exact speed of someone who knows that arriving too fast signals nerves and arriving too slow signals hesitation, and who has long since mastered the particular speed that signals neither. What Zara didn't know was how long Hargrove had been moving toward this moment. Vivian Hargrove had opened an internal affairs inquiry into Derek Boyle 11 months and 2 weeks ago. The basis: 6 formal complaints in 14 months, a pattern recognition flag from a 24-year-old department data analyst who had run stop frequency by neighborhood and race and laid his findings on her desk with the careful voice of someone setting down evidence and waiting to see what happens when they do. The report was 12 pages. Its language was spare and statistical. Stop rates, stop duration, charge rates versus release rates broken down by block and by demographic profile of the individual stopped. The numbers were patient and terrible, the way numbers are when they've been doing something for a long time and were just waiting for someone to look at them. Hargrove had read the 12 pages twice. Then she'd looked at the 6 complaints, 5 from residents of the Morrow Street area, 1 from a store owner on Kelsey Drive, and read each one carefully. Each described an encounter with Boyle that had been legal in the narrowest technical sense and deeply, unmistakably wrong in every sense that the law hadn't managed to catch yet. She recognized the gap. She'd spent her career learning the shape of that gap. She'd thanked the analyst, taken the report, and begun building something that would hold up in a formal administrative hearing. She had not told Boyle. She had not told most of her immediate superiors, because some of those superiors had been receiving favorable annual reports from Boyle for years, and she needed the record complete and uncontested before she handed it to anyone who might be positioned to reach in and rearrange it. She kept the inquiry tight and moved carefully and told almost no one. 9 days before Tuesday's incident, she had begun receiving video clips through the department's community tip line, a line she privately routed through her own review process. The clips were careful work. Timestamps intact, geotagged, consistent angles, audio clean enough to use. The documentation of someone who understood what admissible meant and had thought about chain of custody before they started filming. She'd worked 3 days trying to identify the source. She had a partial image from Boyle's own vehicle's peripheral footage 2 weeks prior. A person in a hoodie at the corner of Morrow and 5th, filming a stop for 2 seconds before stepping back behind a parked car. The hoodie had a small graphic patch on the front, a vintage camera design, legible for approximately 2 seconds before the person moved out of frame. She had driven past Morrow Street twice in those 2 weeks looking for that jacket. She hadn't found it. Then dispatch flagged Morrow Street at 4:13. Boyle's unit, a minor, a gathering crowd. Hargrove looked at the address and thought, there it is. She arrived and spent 90 seconds at the crowd's edge watching before she stepped in. Long enough to clock Boyle's body cam, indicator light off, probably had been off since before he exited his vehicle. Long enough to see Lewis standing apart from the situation in the way of a man who has already separated himself internally. Long enough to see the woman in the green jacket directing questions at Boyle, with the precision of someone who has done interrogative work under difficult conditions and is doing it again now, and close enough to read the name on the military ID before Boyle handed it back. Coleman Meyer A. She went still for 4 seconds. She knew that name. She had been carrying it for almost 3 years since her younger brother Marcus, a different Marcus from the analyst, the world generously full of Marcuses, had come home from a situation in 2019 that could have gone considerably worse than it did. He'd told her about it at Thanksgiving dinner in the specific cadence of a person who is finally far enough from a thing to describe it. A cultural support team that had established relationships on the ground, intelligence at the right moment, a difference that mattered. He'd mentioned one name when he was done telling it, in the way you mention a name attached to a debt you know you can never fully repay. Master Sergeant Meyer Coleman. Hargrove had filed it in the part of her memory that holds names attached to debts. She walked into the scene on Morrow Street, knowing exactly what she was doing. She was going to let it play out. She was going to let it go as far as it needed to go, and then she was going to finish what she had started 11 months ago. She pulled Boyle aside after 2 minutes, a few steps from the group, voices low. He said it, with the confidence of a man who has been running his own version of events long enough that it has become to him the real one. She fits the description. We've had a partial image for 2 weeks. Her jacket matches, Hargrove said very carefully. What description, Derek? Individual in a hoodie with a camera graphic on the front. Caught on peripheral camera at Morrow and 5th 2 weeks ago. We've been trying to identify whoever's been recording stops in this area. She was wearing that jacket. This recording activity, Hargrove said. Has that concern been formally reported to me? He looked at her. Behind his eyes, something made a small, quick movement. It's been a concern at the precinct level. At the precinct level, Hargrove said, and made no other response. Zara, 8 feet away, had caught enough of it. She looked at her phone, then at her mother. Maya had heard it too. She was looking at Boyle, with the stillness of someone who has identified what they're looking at and is deciding what to do with the information. That's why you stopped her, Maya said. Boyle turned. Not the car, Maya said. You stopped my daughter because you recognized her jacket, because you've been trying to identify who's been documenting your stops. She held his gaze. Is that right? Nobody answered. It's me, Zara said. Everyone looked at her. She held up her phone. 9 clips, 47 days. All timestamped, all geotagged, all submitted to the community tip line with case confirmation numbers I can produce right now. She said it in the clearest voice she had. Factual, complete, nothing unnecessary. Mrs. Simmons, corner of Morrow and 8th, stopped 3 times in 1 month while walking her dog. No charge, no cause documented. Mr. Earl Davies. She glanced toward the bus stop. Earl gave her the smallest nod she'd ever seen anyone give. Stopped twice for loitering near a parked vehicle, which is not a violation of any city ordinance. The McKenna family's son, 14 years old, detained for 30 minutes walking home from school carrying a library book. 9 incidents, 9 clips. None of them show what reasonable cause looks like. The crowd had gone quiet in the specific way crowds go quiet when something crosses from confrontation into the territory of record. Someone toward the back raised their phone. Second person did. Earl Davies hadn't moved from the bus stop, but he'd shifted his angle slightly. Boyle looked at the phone in Zara's hand, then at Zara, then at the woman standing beside her. Maya was looking at her daughter. The expression on Maya's face in that moment had no business being on a public sidewalk. It was too exposed, too private, the kind that belongs only in the space between 2 people who have been carrying something together across a long distance. She was watching her daughter stand with the phone raised, and her voice steady and her shoulders squared in a way that owed nothing to luck and everything to who she was. And whatever was moving through Maya's face moved through it like weather, grief and pride braided so tight together that neither had clean edges. Before she drew it back in and put the armor back on, she turned to Boyle. My daughter came out here every day for 47 days and built a documented record of a pattern of conduct. She submitted it through proper channels. She maintained her own logs with timestamps and case numbers. And you stopped her on this sidewalk, not because she was suspicious, but because you recognized her jacket and suspected she was the source of the footage you've been trying to find. She looked at him steadily. And your body cam has been off since before you got out of your vehicle. Lewis looked at his own camera, still blinking. Then he looked out at the street and said nothing. Hargrove took out her notebook. The crowd on Morrow Street by this point had grown to 17 people. They were quiet in the way of people who have collectively decided to bear witness. Earl Davies had not moved. The woman with the stroller was gone. But 2 of her neighbors who had been farther up the block had come down, drawn by some current in the neighborhood's air that carries these things faster than any particular person runs to tell them. Boyle stood with his hands at his sides. He looked for the first time in the afternoon like a man who was aware of the weight of what was closing around him and was computing whether there was still a way to stand outside it. He looked at Lewis. Lewis was watching Hargrove write in her notebook. He wasn't offering anything in either direction. He had his answer to the calculation he always ran, but it was a different answer than the one he usually got, and he was living inside it now. Zara looked at Earl Davies. Earl lowered his phone finally for the first time in 20 minutes. He held it with both hands and nodded once, a slow, definitive nod. the nod of a man who has been keeping a record and knows the record is now in other, equally capable hands. What she found that night, requisitioning footage from the Lenny's quick-stop security camera. The parking lot cam had a clear elevated angle on the curb and the first 20 feet of sidewalk. It showed Boyle's cruiser arriving. It showed Boyle inside the vehicle for 11 seconds before he exited. 11 seconds during which departmental protocol required body cam activation no later than 5 seconds after stopping. Footage showed him step out without touching his chest. And it showed, in clean resolution on the sidewalk, Zara's back as she faced the store, the iron-on camera patch centered between her shoulder blades, fully legible. 2 weeks earlier, that same camera from the opposite angle had caught Zara at the corner of Morrow and 5th for 3 seconds. A partial view, the front of the jacket, 2 seconds of usable footage. That partial image was already in Hargrove's inquiry file. The full image from Tuesday would complete what the partial had started. Hargrove worked through the sidewalk procedure with Boyle in a voice professionally neutral and unhurried, asking questions, writing down answers, noting where the answers and the footage would diverge. Lewis gave a separate account when asked. His account differed from Boyle's in small, specific, consequential ways. By 5:30 the crowd had thinned and the light had gone low across Morrow Street. Zara texted her great-aunt 3 words, "I'm okay, coming home." She looked at her mother, who was standing 6 feet away, tracking the last of Hargrove's questions with the contained attention of someone ensuring every detail is correct in their own memory as well. "You're back," Zara said. Maya glanced over. 4 hours ago. "You didn't call. I was going to surprise you." Zara looked at the cruiser lights cycling against the brick of the buildings. "Good surprise," she said. Something moved through Maya's face and settled, but something with a smile inside it. "Yeah," she said. "I know. That evening, Ms. Patricia cooked because it was what she did when things had happened. Not celebration food, just dinner, the ordinary work of feeding people who needed feeding. Baked chicken, rice from the pot, the green beans she grew in the bed alongside the back porch. The table was set for 3 and the television was off, and the kitchen was warm with steam and the particular smell of a kitchen used for decades by someone who knows what they are doing in it. Maya sat at the table for the first time in 8 months. Zara sat across from her. Miss Patricia moved between the stove and the counter, with the efficient, wordless choreography of a woman who knows her kitchen the way other people know their own breathing, and she set down the plates and sat, and the 3 of them ate. For a while, nothing needed to be said. The room was full in the way of rooms that have been carrying things for a long time. Not uncomfortable exactly, just dense with what hadn't been spoken yet, and a shared understanding that it couldn't all be spoken in one evening, and that was going to have to be all right. Miss Patricia poured water into all 3 glasses without asking. It was a small thing, but it was the kind of small thing she did constantly. The invisible architecture of a woman who had been keeping a household running for 6 deployments and didn't need acknowledgement for any of it, only company. Maya looked at her. "How'd she do?" she said. "This year, the real version," Miss Patricia said, and set down the picture. "She worked too hard and slept too little, and worried about you more than she should have had to. She served herself rice without drama, but she was never difficult. She's never difficult. You raised her not to be." She sat down. "She also kept her grades up and ran that school paper and made sure I ate breakfast on the days when I didn't feel like cooking it." So she picked up her fork. "That's the real version." Maya looked at Zara. Zara looked at her plate. "It wasn't a big deal." She said it was. Miss Patricia said. Miss Patricia said, "You're too thin." Maya said, "I'm within my weight parameters." "That's not what I said." Maya put a forkful of rice in her mouth and didn't argue, which Miss Patricia recognized as its own kind of accommodation. She had a catalogue maintained across decades of Maya's specific forms of accommodation, and she'd learned to read each one correctly. Zara watched her mother eat. The physical fact of her presence was still adjusting to the specific way she occupied a chair, the way she held her silverware. The small sounds she made at the table that Zara had forgotten were part of her. For 8 months, her mother had been a voice on the phone and a set of short sentences, and a green jacket in an old photograph and a shelf of field notebooks in the hall. Now she was sitting across a table passing the salt when asked. And the distance between those two versions of the same person was not something that healed in one evening. Zara didn't expect it to. She just kept watching. Somewhere in the middle of the meal, Miss Patricia set down her fork. She said, "I want to say something to both of you." She looked from Maya to Zara. "I have been in this house with this child for 8 months and 6 deployments before this one. And I am going to speak plainly, because I am 68 years old and I have run out of time for saying things sideways." She looked at Maya. "Your daughter did something remarkable out there, and she did it because of how you raised her, even from far away. And I think she needs to hear you say you know that." The kitchen was quiet. Maya said to Zara. Zara looked her plate. "Okay," she said. "Just okay." But something in the way she said it released, fractionally, like a door giving slightly in a frame that's been swollen shut for too long. Miss Patricia picked up her fork. "Good," she said. "Now eat." After dinner, Miss Patricia took herself to the other room and turned on her shows at the volume she used when she knew a conversation in the kitchen needed space. She'd developed this calibration over years. She was very good at it. Zara washed the plates. Maya dried them, picking up the task without being asked. They worked in silence. The window above the sink looked out on the backyard and the small garden bed and the dark beyond it. "Hargrove's coming Wednesday," Zara said. To explain the inquiry. "What happens next?" "She called me," Maya said. "I know. I'll need a lawyer for my formal statement." "I know a former JAG," Maya said. From the other room, without raising her voice. "Of course you do," Miss Patricia said. Something passed through the kitchen that wasn't quite laughter but had laughter inside it. Something lighter than the evening had been. It released a little pressure without resolving the larger thing. Maya dried a glass and held it for a moment then. "You started 2 days after I deployed." Zara kept her hands in the water. "Hargrove told you?" "She did. I didn't know it was 2 days until she said it. I thought it was later, after the thing with Mrs. Simmons, but she had the first submission date." Maya set the glass in the cabinet. 2 days. "I was angry," Zara said. She said it the way she said most true things, directly without softening. "I didn't have a place to put it, and I went out the next morning because I couldn't just sit in it." She handed a plate to her mother. "That's not the only reason. I think I would have done it eventually, but that's when it started." Maya dried the plate. She said quietly, "I know. I wanted you to know the honest version," Zara said. "Not to make you feel bad about it, just so it's said." "Thank you for telling me," Maya said. "The honest version specifically." They finished the dishes without speaking. The silence after that was different from the dinner table silence, more specific in it, more chosen. The kind of silence that acknowledges something has been said without needing to say anything more right away. Hargrove came Wednesday afternoon. She sat in Miss Patricia's front room and laid out the structure of the inquiry in the methodical, plain language way of someone who has explained procedures to people who needed to understand them without getting buried in 11 months of documentation, the data pattern, what the tip-line submissions meant inside an active inquiry, and why the independence of the source had mattered, what Zara would need to say in her formal statement. Zara asked 3 questions. The third one made Hargrove pause before answering. "Why didn't the tip line tell me it was going to an active investigation? It just sent case numbers." Hargrove said, "Because your independence as a source was what made your documentation usable. If you'd known the investigation existed, that independence could be questioned. The case numbers were a record for you to keep. They served that purpose. So I was more useful because I didn't know," Zara said. "Yes," Hargrove said without hedging it. "And I can't tell you I'm sorry about that because the integrity of the case is what matters. What I can tell you is that what you built is solid. It held up because of how you did it." Before she left, she told Zara about her brother Marcus. Not the full details, those weren't hers to share, but enough. A unit. A situation in 2019. A name she'd been carrying ever since. Zara listened to all of it. Then she said, "She doesn't talk about any of that." "No," Hargrove said. "They usually don't." She shook Zara's hand when she left, which was different from what she'd done when she arrived. When she arrived, she'd shaken Miss Patricia's hand. Neither Hargrove nor Zara commented on the difference. They both noticed it. The week before the hearing, Hargrove met Maya in the parking lot outside the Internal Affairs office. On a morning cold enough to see your breath, pine trees dark against a grey sky at the lot's far edge. They sat on a bench facing those trees, and Hargrove told her about Marcus, and then about the hearing, what it was going to be, what it was going to take time to become. The union rep was good. Fitch had spent 20 years in rooms like this and knew where the soft spots were. These things went at the speed they went at, Maya said. He stopped her specifically to suppress evidence. That's what the record will show, Hargrove said. It's what happened. Yes, Hargrove said. It is a pause. The trees stood in their line. Hargrove had one more thing and said it. Your daughter built something that holds up. She built it alone without knowing anyone was watching. Documentation is meticulous. The chain of custody is clean. She's 16 years old. Maya rubbed the side of her thumb against her palm once, a small private gesture. She read my notebooks when she was 12, she said. Found them on a shelf. I didn't know she'd done it until recently. The observation habits, Hargrove said. The logging. Yes, Maya said. They sat for a few more minutes on the bench, and then they went back to work. The hearing ran for 4 hours across 2 days. Long table, institutional lighting, a window that looked out at a parking structure. Gerald Fitch, Boyle's union representative, was compact, precise, 20 years in rooms exactly like this one. Fitch opened by characterizing the documentation project in terms that were technically accurate and deliberately unflattering. A minor resident with a personal grievance against a veteran officer, submitting selective video clips to a tip line outside normal departmental channels, without proper context, without knowledge of ongoing police activity in the area, without any understanding of the operational considerations that shape enforcement decisions on a given block, on a given day. He said it without emotion, in the voice of someone presenting a reasonable interpretation that the panel was free to adopt. He was good enough at it that the hearing officer made a note. Then Hargrove laid out the 11 months of inquiry documentation, and Fitch's framing took on a different shape beside it. Fitch opened by characterizing the documentation project in terms that were technically accurate and deliberately unflattering. A minor resident with a personal grievance against a veteran officer, submitting selective video clips to a tip line outside normal departmental channels, without proper context, without knowledge of ongoing police activity in the area, without any understanding of the operational considerations that shape enforcement decisions on a given block, on a given day. He said it without emotion, in the voice of someone presenting a reasonable alternative interpretation that the panel was free to adopt. He was good enough at it that the hearing officer made a note. Then he said, "Context matters." He said it twice. Then Hargrove laid out the 11 months of inquiry documentation beside Fitch's framing, and the two things sat next to each other in the room for the rest of the hearing. Boyle presented well. That was the uncomfortable truth that had to be acknowledged to understand why the hearing took as long as it did. 12 years on the force, multiple commendations, no prior sustained complaints, and those commendations were real, which was part of what made everything complicated, because real people are rarely constructed entirely from their worst quality. He spoke about Tuesday in measured, orderly sentences. He used the word subject every time he meant Zara, subject, not the minor, not the girl's subject, without appearing to notice he was doing it. He expressed regret for the body cam violation in the calibrated, not excessive way of a man who has learned the exact volume of regret that plays well in formal settings. He did not mention the jacket. Fitch then asked Boyle to describe his general approach to community policing on Morrow Street, and Boyle described it, clearly, with the practiced sincerity of a man who has given this version of himself enough times that he has started, genuinely, to believe it. He talked about building trust. He talked about knowing the neighborhood. He talked about the difficult balance between community relations and enforcement responsibility. And he talked about it in the warmly specific language of someone who has attended the right trainings and knows how to reproduce the vocabulary. The hearing officer listened. Fitch nodded twice, the nods of a coach watching an athlete execute a move exactly as practiced. On the other side of the screen in the adjacent room, Zara listened to this and said nothing. She'd heard it before. She had it on video, a different version, quicker and harder. The version Boyle used when the camera was off and the crowd wasn't watching, and she had that version on video too. She kept her hands still in her lap and waited. Fitch asked whether he'd been aware of individuals recording departmental stops in the area prior to Tuesday. Boyle said he'd been generally aware of some recording activity, but no, he had not been thinking about it when he initiated the stop of the subject. He said it clearly. He looked at the hearing officer when he said it. He said it without any apparent effort. On the other side of the screen in the adjacent room, Zara said very quietly, "He remembers exactly what he did." Maya put her hand briefly on Zara's forearm. Fitch walked Boyle through his account of the stop, the subject's proximity to the vehicle, her behavior during questioning. Evasive, he said, uncooperative with routine inquiries. The length of the stop in proportion to the questions asked. He framed the body cam failure as an inadvertent lapse during radio traffic during approach. He acknowledged the procedural finding. He moved through it without dwelling. Fitch then asked Boyle to describe his general approach to community policing on Morrow Street, and Boyle described it clearly, with the practiced sincerity of a man who has given this version of himself enough times that he has started, genuinely, to believe it. He talked about building trust. He talked about knowing the neighborhood. He talked about the difficult balance between community relations and enforcement responsibility, and he talked about it in the warmly specific language of someone who has attended the trainings and knows how to reproduce the vocabulary. It took Hargrove placing Exhibit G on the table to change the shape of the room. The partial image from Morrow and 5th 2 weeks before Tuesday. A hoodie, a graphic on the front, 2 seconds of usable footage from Boyle's own vehicle's peripheral camera. She asked Boyle to describe what he saw in the lower left corner. He looked at it. He said he saw a person in a hoodie with what might be some kind of graphic patch on the front. Could be a camera. The image was partial, hard to say for certain. Hargrove said, and on Tuesday, when he initiated the stop of Zara Coleman on Morrow Street, what was she wearing? Fitch objected. The objection was noted. The question stood. Boyle said, a hooded sweatshirt, with a patch on the front. The pause was one breath held longer than it should have been. In the adjacent room, Zara felt Maya go very still beside her. Not tension, the opposite of tension. The specific stillness of someone who has just confirmed something and is setting it down in the correct internal file. Fitch's eyes moved to the table in front of him, then back to Boyle. The movement of a man watching a ship and computing the rate of drift. I don't recall, Boyle said. The hearing officer's pen moved, just one note, just the one word of testimony into the record. But the pen moved. Then Hargrove placed the still image from the Lenny's parking lot camera on the table. Boyle through his windshield, the timestamp sharp and specific. 11 seconds before he exited the vehicle. 11 seconds during which departmental protocol required camera activation no later than 5 after stopping. And in the upper corner of the frame on the sidewalk outside the store, Zara's back, the iron-on camera graphic centered between her shoulder blades, clear in the parking lot camera's elevated angle, fully legible. Fitch said Derek, in the very quiet voice of a man telling someone to stop without using the word stop. Then he said nothing else. He closed his file. Boyle looked at the image. He looked at it for a long time. In a room full of people waiting to see what he would do with the decision in front of him. And then the thing that had been underneath everything came through. Not in a shout, but in a statement offered like a justification, like the last piece of a structure that had finally given way, because it was built on something that didn't hold. She was filming police officers in the execution of their duties. That's a public safety concern. The hearing officer's pen moved on the paper. The room was quiet. Hargrove let the quiet stand for as long as it needed to stand. So you did know, she said simply. No edge in it, no emphasis. Just the statement, placed in the record, where it would stay. Boyle did not answer. Fitch kept his file closed. The formal determination came on a Tuesday 5 weeks later. Administrative leave converted to termination. The body cam violation, documented across not just Tuesday but 15 other stops in 14 months, where the camera had failed to activate within protocol. The Lenny's footage, the 11-month pattern Hargrove had assembled, and Boyle's statement at the hearing together formed a record that the department's disciplinary standards could not work around. Fitch filed an appeal immediately. That was expected. No one pretended the appeal wouldn't run for months, possibly longer. Hargrove had said from the beginning that these things took the time they took, but the record existed. The piece in the Fayetteville Observer ran 3 days later. 600 words, factual, contained. The documentation was described as having been conducted by a minor resident of the Morrow Street neighborhood. 3 sentences near the bottom noted that the community tip line had received 11 submissions from this source, and that those submissions had been integral to the internal affairs inquiry preceding the termination. Simmons called Miss Patricia to read it to her over the phone. Miss Patricia had already read it herself. She listened anyway, because some things need to be said out loud to fully count. Zara read it alone in her room, 3 times. She thought about 12-year-old herself with a blog, and 11 readers, and the stubborn conviction that getting the facts right mattered even when no one was paying attention. She thought about Marcus McKenna, 14 years old, standing on a sidewalk with a library book about aircraft. She thought about the 20 minutes it had taken her to get past the anger enough to write that log entry accurately. She was glad now that it had taken 20 minutes rather than less. The accuracy was what had mattered. The accuracy was what had lasted. She texted Maya. The piece ran. Maya texted back in 4 minutes. I read it then, 60 seconds after that. It's good work. Zara looked at those words for a while. She saved the conversation without labeling the folder, just left the date. Then she opened a new document. Not for the school paper, for something larger, a guide, how the tip line worked and what documentation held up in administrative proceedings, and why broken down by the kind of recording, the device, the submission method. Chain of custody for a minor. What your actual rights were in a stop versus what you thought they were. The gap between those 2 things laid out clearly and without assumption. The kind of thing she'd needed 8 weeks ago and hadn't had anywhere to find. She started writing it the way she wrote everything, as completely and as accurately as she knew how. Mrs. Simmons brought over a sweet potato pie the evening the termination was announced. She stood at the door in her good coat and handed the pie to Ms. Patricia with the solemnity of someone presenting something that had been thought about carefully. She said, "Tell that child she did right." Then she went back down the front steps and walked home, and that was all. Zara heard about it second-hand from Miss Patricia. The next morning, she sat with it for a while. There were things she knew how to do with information. Log it, verify it, file it, publish it. And there were things she didn't quite know how to do with yet. And this was one of them. She just let it sit in her chest where it landed and didn't try to do anything particular with it. Earl Davies texted a thumbs-up emoji. No words, just the thumbs up. She texted one back. Saturday morning was cold and silver bright. Maya was on the front porch with a coffee when Zara came out at 7:30 and handed her a second mug without asking. She sat on the step below her mother, which had been their configuration since Zara was 5 years old, and the step was large and the world was simple enough that this was enough of a world. Maya wrapped both hands around the mug. Lawyer says the appeal could run 6 to 8 months, Zara said. That tracks, Maya said. He's optimistic about the outcome. He should be. The record is solid. He also says to expect Boyle's team to argue chain of custody on my submissions because I'm a minor. Maya said, what did you tell him? I told him I had complete logs of every submission with timestamps and case numbers, and that I'd never altered a file. Zara drank her coffee. He said that was a strong position. He said it in the way people say things when they're surprised. Maya made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, smaller and more private. Good, she said. The street was quiet. 2 houses down a sprinkler was running, the reliable suburban sound of early morning. The trees along the block were mostly bare now, showing sky through their branches. A dog barked twice from the next block, then stopped. Zara turned her mug in her hands. She said, I keep thinking about what you said, about there being no version where you were here the way I needed, and also doing what you were doing. Maya waited. I've been working out whether I believe it, Zara said. And I think it's probably true. I know what you do is real. I know it takes all of you. I've read your notebooks. I know who you are when you're working. She looked at the bare tree 2 houses down. I also think there are days where I didn't want someone remarkable. I just wanted my mom, regular, not deployed, just around. Maya said. I know, I'm not saying you should have been something different, Zara said. She turned and looked at her mother, with the eyes they shared. Same shape, same steadiness, same quality of not moving under pressure. I'm saying it was hard for me, and I needed that to be said between us. I hear it, Maya said. Her voice had gone to the register it went to when she meant something completely. I've known it for a while. I didn't know how to say that I knew it in a short phone call and have it sit right after we hung up. I was afraid of saying it wrong. Zara nodded. Not forgiving, not yet, not all at once, but something releasing, like a door giving slightly in a frame that's been swollen shut a long time. First thing I did when the plane touched down, Maya said. When I turned my phone on, I looked up your school paper. Zara looked at her. There's a piece from when you were 12, Maya said. The grocery store. Who owned the property? What was promised versus what was delivered? I remember writing it. I read it in the rental car in the parking garage at Raleigh, Maya said. Twice. A man with a luggage cart walked past and asked if I was all right. She looked at the street, with the expression of someone looking at something much further away. I told him I was reading something my daughter wrote. Zara was quiet for a moment. Then, can I ask you something? Yes, Maya said. When you were in the field, the first deployment, the first year you were doing it for real, did you ever feel like you were making the wrong call by leaving? Not the work. I know the work was right. I mean the leaving, the people you were leaving. Maya was quiet. A sparrow landed on the porch railing and took off again. Yes, she said, more than once. What did you do with it? I kept going, Maya said. And I came home when I could. And I tried to make the time I had count more than the time I didn't. She turned the mug in her hands. It's not a satisfying answer, I know that. It's the honest one, Zara said. Yeah. Maya looked at the street. That's I've got most days. Zara turned her mug in her hands. Was it good? She said. Maya looked at her daughter. The expression on her face was the same one that had been there on the sidewalk of Morrow Street. The one with no armor on it, the one she couldn't always stop when it came and didn't always try to. She'd probably been wearing it in a parking garage in Raleigh, alone in a rental car, caught off guard by 600 words written by a 12-year-old who had cared enormously about getting the facts right. You know it was good, Maya said. Zara turned back to the street. She drank her coffee. After a while, she leaned back until her shoulder touched her mother's knee. Not a hug, something quieter and more solid than a hug, the specific weight of a person choosing to be in contact. And Maya put her hand on top of Zara's head very lightly, the way you rest a hand on something you've been worried about losing and have just found again. The sprinkler ran 2 houses down. The bare trees stood in the morning light. The street went on being quiet around them. 3 months later, the guide ran in a community legal aid newsletter. Hey, Coleman. 4,000 words. How the tip line worked and how to use it. What documentation held up in administrative proceedings and why broken down by recording type device submission method. Chain of custody for a minor. What to say if you were stopped. What your actual rights were in that moment versus what you thought they were. The gap between those two things laid out clearly and without assumption. The kind of thing she'd needed and hadn't had, written in the most direct, accurate language she knew how to use. Maya called the afternoon it went up. She called, not a text, because some things needed a voice. They talked for 37 minutes. Maya asked 2 specific technical questions about the guide, the chain of custody section, whether Zara had accounted for the difference in state law regarding minor consent in documentation, and Zara answered both of them and took notes on what she'd need to add in the next revision. Neither of them mentioned that this was what their phone calls had always wanted to be and had never quite had the room to become. At one point, Maya said, "Send this to the resource office at Fort Liberty. They have families who need this." Zara said, "You think they'd actually use it?" "Anyone who sent their kid out into the world would use it," Maya said. "Yes," Zara said she'd send it. "Good," Maya said. And then she was quiet in the particular way she was quiet before she said something she had been holding for a while, sorting out how to say precisely. "I'm proud of you. I'm saying it directly so it's in the record between us." Zara said, "I know." She did know. She'd known it from a text message that said good work and nothing else. and meant more than most full sentences could. She'd known it from 37 minutes on the phone on a Tuesday afternoon, from a parking garage in Raleigh at noon, from a shelf of field notebooks that a 12-year-old girl had read cover to cover in 2 days, and then gone out the next morning with a phone in her pocket, because some things you learn so deep they run in your blood, regardless of the distance between you and the person who put them there. She'd known it the way you know things that are true whether they get said or not, but it was better said. "I know," Zara said, "but it's good to hear."